What's up, Barnhill family, and welcome back to your home for all things combat sports.
Yo.
Guys, we got a great episode coming your way today. UFC Sacramento just wrapped. We're going to talk about the main event and what an exciting fight it was. Robocop called out DDP. We're going to give our thoughts on that. And should Fluffy make a move to 170? Nick and I may have differing opinions on that specific topic. We're also going to talk about RAF and Henry Cejudo getting his revenge on Merab Dvalishvili, as well as many other UFC fighters that are currently on the roster that competed last night at RAF. And we're going to finalize the conversation with some boxing. Rolly Romero versus Teofimo Lopez. Rolly had a lot to say after the fight. None of it was really all that great. Teofimo now becoming a 3-division world champion. We'll give our thoughts on that and what's next as well. Everything in the timestamps as always, so you know where to find which conversation it may be that you're most interested in. So we're going to start with Sacramento. My goodness, what a great card in general, right? But then also what a great main event. So this was everything you want out of a main event. All 5 rounds, it delivered. There was exciting action back and forth both ways. Fluffy combated extreme adversity with those devastating leg kicks early. He ate some big shots from Robocop, had real trouble getting him down, made some adjustments, had some mid-fight success, and then Robocop poured it on at the end. Really awesome main event for the Sacramento fans last night.
Yeah, Robocop and Fluffy was very entertaining, and it's so interesting, right? We saw Fluffy lose, but he showed dog toughness. He showed an ability to have a card put on his back. Now, that's the second fight night main event that he's been a part of
this year.
Just this year. The last one was Strickland, and then this one was Robocop. It doesn't win either of them, and I understand that usually the trajectory of a guy like that would be, now you're moving back into 3-round fights. Now you're going back on a little bit lower down the cards. But I mean, he's such a reliable source if you need a main event to deliver. And of course, it takes 2 to tango, so Robocop deserves all the same praise and credit because he showed up and dealt with a very difficult guy. Let's not forget that Fluffy Hernandez had won 8 fights, if I'm mistaken. Maybe it's 7 before the Sean Strickland fight. He was on a real tear, and people thought that he could be kind of coming in as that dark horse of the division. So Robocop didn't have an easy fight or a gimme fight, even though Fluffy was coming off a loss. But he showed up and really delivered. He had to deal with some adversity. I'm sure that Robocop's game plan was to deal with an orthodox Fluffy Hernandez for 25 minutes, and he knows that the durability in the gas tank is there for Fluffy. Usually it's hard to get a guy like that out of there, but I don't think he really saw it on his bingo card that he was going to have to deal with a southpaw Fluffy for the better part of the fight, about 20 minutes.
By his own doing, right?
By his own doing, yeah. He did drop Fluffy about 7 times, I think, with that calf kick. And, you know, Robocop is built like a statue. He looks like he's made of granite. And you have to assume that even though his striking is a little bit slower than some of the guys at 185, he lands with real power. His timing is really sharp on it. And he just has a knack for finding, you know, a chink in your armor once he has done a little bit of damage. He knew that that calf was compromised. The first one put Fluffy down, and then every single one that followed also put Fluffy down. You know, Fluffy did the right thing. He switched stances, even though he's not as comfortable fighting in the southpaw stance. I do think that that was the right move for him. And then, you know, at one point, I think it was right at the end of the second round, he just had to bite on his mouthpiece and realize, okay, this is going to be a whole lot harder of a night in the office than I anticipated. Maybe not skill for skill, but as far as taking damage, and I cannot afford to keep getting kicked. A referee might step in if I get dropped too many more times. Credit to the referee for not stopping the fight because Fluffy was able to make the right adjustments. But, you know, Robocop definitely was in the driver's seat once he started to do enough damage. And credit to Fluffy for showing up and sticking it out in his hometown. You know, I mean, the Sacramento card was built for him, and he wasn't going to go out easy. He wasn't going to go out quitting because of leg kicks. He showed a lot of adversity. He dealt with it, and Robocop deserves all the credit, but Fluffy definitely showed up and showed out for a main event.
Yeah, I mean, Robocop's now on the short list of guys that they're going to move towards the top of the bill to fight for, you know, contenders positions, because I think Fluffy was number 6 last night, so Robocop will likely take that position. He may fall a couple behind. He called out DDP, which I don't think he'll necessarily get just yet, and we'll get into what's next here in just a second, but just a couple things on the technical side. Robocop found that calf kick even out of the southpaw stance for Fluffy.
Yeah.
He would time it at certain times when Fluffy would collect his legs and get a little bit square. Now, it wasn't as devastating as when it was the true lead leg,
right?
But he was still able to find that kick a couple of times. And even those microseconds where Fluffy would switch back to orthodox for 1 second, he would knock him with the kick.
Yeah.
And then he would use that to set up big striking over the top as well. I mean, I loved the shot selection out of Robocop. I loved that he was finding that calf kick and he was timing it so well because Fluffy was doing everything he could to prevent that from happening, because we wouldn't be sitting here today talking about a decision victory for Robocop had he not switched to southpaw. We would have been talking about a TKO finish due to leg strikes, because all Robocop would have had to do is chop that 4 or 5 more times and then step back and force Anthony Hernandez to stand to his feet, which he probably wouldn't have been able to do at that point in time. The fight would have been called. We've seen stuff like that happen before.
Sure.
So, I think it was a smart adjustment on Anthony Hernandez's part. I think Robocop did a great job of even still finding that kick a handful of times after the adjustment. But the story here is Gregory Rodrigues' amazing takedown defense. I mean, Anthony Hernandez has gotten down very good fighters and very high-level grapplers, and Robocop, like you said, he's a statue, but we can't just chalk it up to size, because Fluffy has taken down big guys before, guys that were much bigger than him. I don't know, maybe as big as Robocop, but somewhere in that vicinity. 185 fighters are not small guys, but Robocop was not moving at all, and he was shifting weight well, he was defending well, he was pummeling well, getting those underhooks, reversing positions. So I saw a lot of stuff out of Robocop that, I liked last night. Is he ready for the top of the bill yet? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know if he'll get the DDP fight next, but I love a guy that calls people out. And look, he fought somebody who was above him in the ranks, so he's trying to keep that trajectory moving that direction. He doesn't want to go backwards and fight somebody now behind him, and I would assume that he'll be right around that number 6 ranking. But I thought it was a beautiful game plan from him. Robocop really did shine in the moments where he had to. And Fluffy Hernandez is very hard to deal with, particularly up against the cage. And I think there was something like 20-something shots taken by Fluffy, and Robocop was able to defend about all but 3 of them, I think. So very good, intelligent defense. And the overarching theme for combat sports as a whole, whether it's boxing, MMA, whatever it is, everybody always says, until you start training, well, the big guys would be a problem for these smaller guys, right? And size has usually been the one thing that big guys will, rest their laurels on. They're like, oh, well, I'm big. And, remember that one time we were like at a Hooters or something because our streaming service went down, and they're like, man, this Conor McGregor and Dustin Poirier, they're pretty good fighters. And some, fat drunk guy was like, yeah, but they're only 155 pounds. They're just little guys. And they don't realize just how technical and actually how big those guys are. But Robocop is a weird situation because, yes, he is built like a Greek god. He's massive, but he also has the technique, and he's clearly paying attention to the fights that he has booked. Sometimes we see guys say, oh, I don't know much about my opponent. I didn't really look into the tape study. Robocop did a lot of tape study on Fluffy. He knew exactly how to dig that underhook up against the cage, and Fluffy really didn't have much opportunity to chain his cage wrestling. He was sort of stuffed as soon as he made his entry, and again, that's technique from Robocop matched with his strength, and that's a deadly combination. Once you have one of these big guys who's physically commanding, really strong, and he actually knows how to use it with good technique, you're dealing with a real problem. At 6'3", still somehow able to make 185 pounds, I think Robocop at 34 years old does have the real tools it takes to make a jump into the top 5 and potentially fight for a title one day. But remember, 185 is very stacked, especially at the top. I don't want to say it's top heavy because 1 through 5 are all pretty damn solid fighters. But Robocop, being this physically commanding guy, also having good technique, and basically just knowing how to keep the fight where he has his best chances. He's not the fastest striker, but what he does throw, he throws with 100% power, but he also doesn't seem to compromise his balance or his stance when he throws those. And look, I was saying it on the live stream. Robocop strikes are a little bit telegraphed, but you don't know what target he's going to hit you on, right? He kind of shows you that he wants to throw that power side punch, but you don't know if it's going to go to your head or your body, and you don't want to risk being wrong. Zig when you should have zag, or high guard when you should have low guard. Robocop may be a little bit telegraphed on some of these shots that he throws, but his target, mixing up of the targets is what I find very impressive, because there were certain moments where Fluffy Hernandez was certain he was going to attack him to the head, and then boom, that straight 2 goes right to the body. especially when Fluffy had made that adjustment and went into the open stance, because then, you know, once the guy gets a little bit more square, that torso becomes a little bit more open. They're less in a bladed stance and more square to you. That's also why he made that calf kick work even in the open stance. You know, you have to reach a little bit when you're trying to kick somebody in their back leg. But Robocop was able to do it partially because Fluffy Hernandez isn't used to fighting in the southpaw stance. So when he would commit to throwing a 2, he'd kind of bring that back leg with him a little bit, and then, like you said, he'd collect his legs, they'd get a little bit too close, and Robocop, being so long, was able to still sneak that kick in there. And I thought it was a really good performance overall. Again, I love that he made a call out. Now, Fluffy Hernandez left on crutches to my knowledge, but I heard that Robocop left on a wheelchair. I don't know why.
I don't know what would have caused that.
Yeah, maybe it's something in that grappling situation up against the cage. Maybe it has to do with his hips. I don't know. It might not even be true, because when I saw him leave the post-fight press conference, he was walking, but he could have been walking just off the stage a few feet and then getting back into a wheelchair. So I don't know if there's any truth to that, but I did hear some rumblings about that at the post-fight press conference. So I'd love to know what happens. I'd love to know how long he's going to need to take a break, because that was a 5-round war for both men. I would assume they both want to enjoy the rest of this year and not have to get back into a fight camp. But if Robocop gets a big opportunity to crack into the top 5, and it's got to be this year, I'd say he better go ahead and do it.
Yeah, so let's talk about what's next for both guys, because I do think that's a perfect segue, because the how long it's going to be before either man can come back is a big factor. Now, I think Gregory Rodrigues could come back faster than Anthony Hernandez.
Me too.
Because he didn't take the beating that Anthony took. And who knows, maybe something got torn in Fluffy's leg. I mean, his leg was chewed up at the end of that fight. But let's look at what's next for Rodrigues first, right? Now, let's go with what he asked for. He called for DDP.
Yeah.
Now, DDP is in probably the best situation that you can be in for a potential contender, because he's got 2 wins over the current champion.
Right.
And he's got a recent win against a former champion, albeit in a different weight class. So DDP, in my opinion, has his sights set up the mountain, not down, right?
Yeah.
Now, would Robocop and Dricus be a fun fight?
Banger.
Absolutely. That's a banger fight. I would probably favor Dricus, and I think the odds would probably reflect that if they came out. He's done more against higher level competition. So then I start to look back in the rankings, and when we did our immediate thoughts live stream last night, I put in the chat a couple of options for Robocop. I think Izzy was in there, Brendan Allen, Caio Bajalio, DDP, and the one that most of the people thought should be the next fight, and I actually agree with this, is Joe Pyfer.
Yeah.
Now, depending on how scheduling works out, I think Robocop versus Body Bags, 2 great fight names, by the way, duking it out, 2 guys with heavy power, that both like to finish fights by knockout. That would be a great fight, and I think it's a more attainable fight for Robocop. I love that he called somebody out. Like, we say this all the time on the channel. When Bisping puts the microphone in your face, or DC or Rogan or whoever the heck it is, and they say, who do you want next? If you have a name on the top of your tongue, you can kind of orchestrate your career to some degree. Now, the matchmakers still control things, but I think that Robocop, if there's any point of criticism in the call out, should have been for somebody that's not on the very, very short list to fight for a belt. I think that Joe Pyfer is not on anybody's list to fight next for the belt. DDP could reasonably fight next for the belt, even though I don't think he will. So my take for next fight for Robocop, should be Joe Pyfer versus Robocop.
I love that fight. I don't think Joe Pyfer would be quite as undersized against Robocop as Fluffy Hernandez was. And I know we'll get into Fluffy's potential future, maybe in a different weight class, potentially 170. But I actually love that fight. And we all thought that Joe Pyfer would be on that Philadelphia card. He wasn't. He was in attendance, but he was not actually suited up and fighting. So maybe he's looking to get active. Maybe he wants to do something at the end of this year. And Robocop, though he did take some bumps and bruises and had to go 25 minutes, will probably be okay to fight by about November or December, I would assume. But yeah, I really do think that calling out a guy like DDP, a former champion, is very smart for a guy who's trying to crack into #1 contender fights and potentially title fights. Former champions are very difficult to come by by in this sport, and you have to take your opportunities when you can. Combat sports is also one of those things where you have to expect the unexpected. You never know what you're going to see. I mean, we saw a ton of, I think it was 10 finishes.
There was a lot of finishes last night.
Yeah, on last night's card. You never know what to expect, right? Robocop was the underdog, and he got his hand raised. So one thing you can always expect, and we have to understand as a fighter especially, you really need to know this. One question is always going to get asked, not once per night, but every single fight that ends is going to end with, what would you like next? And I love that Robocop came out and said, I want DDP. Again, I think it's a little bit lofty. I don't think he gets that next just because of the orientation of the top three, which is Khamzat. Is he going to 205 or not? We don't know. Sean Strickland, and then, of course, DDP that has those 2 wins over Sean. I can imagine Sean Strickland doesn't want to go get his revenge on a guy who's now beat him twice. And the first one was very close and competitive.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm Sean, right? I mean, Nasruddin definitely has a claim to be staked. Since that Sean Strickland loss, he's looked phenomenal. Khamzat, there was a close fight. You could make a case there. But DDP, I think, is who Sean wants. Yeah. He wants that win. He's like, I beat both of these other guys. Give me the guy that's got 2 wins over me. I heavily dispute one of them. I don't dispute the other. So to me, it seems like that's the fight that Sean wants. Now, is the UFC going to force him into a Khamzat rematch? I don't know. We can actually, I have a question for you later in the episode specifically regarding that, but we'll get to that later. But let's talk about Anthony Hernandez now, because we had, I think, somewhat of a disagreement last night on what should be next for him. I said very clearly 170.
Yeah.
When you look at his body and you look at his body composition, body fat percentage compared to Gregory Rodrigues, it looked to me, the eye test at least, that he could very easily lose about 10 to 12 pounds of fat and look more like a high-level mixed martial arts fighter.
Yeah.
And, I think you had some concerns about the gas tank, but I think that his weight cut would be, the water part of it rather, would be roughly the same if he just did a body recomposition and lost about 12 pounds of fat. Then he's cutting the same amount of water effectively. It's just we're doing a diet that's appropriate for losing fat, because in my opinion, and I know Robocop's on the bigger end of 185, but you can't convince me that if Michael Morales can make 170, that Fluffy can't make 170.
Well, that's a great point. And Michael Morales is a great example of a 170 fighter that's probably bigger than Fluffy Hernandez as far as height, thickness, stature, everything. I never want to force a guy to go into a 15-pound extra weight cut. That's brutal. But I do see how Fluffy Hernandez looked like he was in a different weight class than Robocop. And, 10 years ago, Fluffy would have been a normal-sized middleweight, maybe even a big middleweight. But nowadays, with the modern science of weight cutting, people know how to pull down from 225 pounds. Just look at Alex Pereira. I mean, how big he has gotten in just a short amount of time. It wasn't all that long ago. He was the champion of 185.
He weighed more than Cyril Gahn for a heavyweight fight. Think about that for a second. So a guy that won the belt at 185 weighed more than a large heavyweight.
Yeah.
When he fought him at the White House lawn. So that's insane. Like you said, it goes to your point that these guys are doing weight manipulation and water manipulation. The science is locked in, and these guys everybody's huge for their weight class, and Robocop's no exception, but Fluffy is kind of small for 85.
Yeah, and contrary to popular belief, a lot of people think, okay, if you see a little bit more visceral fat on somebody, it's probably easier for them to cut weight than these guys who are just muscle bound and look like they have no fat to lose. Like their body fat percentage is so low, but it's actually the opposite. If you have a lot of muscle, your muscles retain water, and when you do that water cut, yes, you're cutting a little bit more, about somewhere in the ballpark of 5 to 12 pounds more than the other guys in your division, but that water's coming from your muscles. When you have fat on your torso, and Fluffy Hernandez, that's basically where he carries it, is right there in the midsection.
Hence the nickname.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very fitting nickname. But whenever he cuts the weight, instead of it being an aggressive fight week weight cut where you're doing the salt depletion, water manipulation, and you're doing it that way, you're actually having to cut weight and change your diet and lifestyle as soon as the fight gets booked, 8 to 10 weeks away. So it's actually more difficult to lose fat than it is to do an aggressive water load and then unload, you know? So it's very weird, and your brain would tell you the opposite, right? Oh, that guy's got fat. Why doesn't he just burn that fat? And then, you know, he can afford to lose more weight. I honestly think the best thing Fluffy can do is hit the weight room, start getting more aggressive with his strength and conditioning. Now, strength and conditioning will never win you a world title, but it can help with things that make life as a fighter very difficult, like the weight cut. Fight week is brutal, and if it's going to be hard for you or it's going to be easy, it all depends on the body that you take into fight week. And I really do think that Fluffy could go to 170, but I don't think he has to. I think if he were to put on a little bit more muscle and potentially get a little bit bigger, he wouldn't deplete himself. I don't think his cardio would be an issue. We've never seen a cardio issue out of Fluffy at 185. So I kind of worry and lean towards the side of, if he were to cut another 15 pounds, his durability might go away, his cardio might go away, and those are two of his best weapons. So I almost would say stay at 185, but will his chances of becoming champion at 185 diminish? Because now we've seen him suffer these losses in a row. And, you know, while he's a great fighter, he's not quite the size of the upper echelon of 185 anymore. The modern era has just changed the game. You got all these guys, the George Lockharts, the Mike Dolces, all these really good nutritionists. And even the PI has a great team led by Charles and some other people over there at the PI who know how to manipulate the weight scale, and they know how to figure out exactly what your body's going to do to lead up to the making the weight. So I think Fluffy might need to go hit the gym. Obviously, he made some good adjustments after losing to Sean Strickland. He found himself a home at Extreme Couture and is now one of the guys at arguably the best gym, for sure, like the best gym in North America, I would say.
One of them, yeah, for sure. It's becoming that.
I think Team Habib has the crown for being the best, most dominant gym in MMA. But if you're talking about North America, Extreme Couture, Eric Nixick, those guys have it down and they know what they're doing. And if you lose to one of their guys, the best thing you can do is go find yourself on their mats and getting rounds with the guy that either beat you or the guys that they're moving around with every day. Extreme Couture is full of killers, and I think that Fluffy made the right decision. I don't think we need to see a massive career change as far as weight class goes, as far as camp goes. I think he just maybe need to get a little bit more muscle, try to fill out that frame, get a little bit stronger for the division, and hold tight at 185.
You see, I still think 170 is the move for him, right?
Yeah.
Because even if, like, you can put on muscle, but at the end of the day, your frame is your frame.
Sure,
your bone structure, your size, how wide your shoulders are, how wide your hips are. You know, and when you look at just the skeletal difference between Robocop last night and Fluffy, it's pretty stark.
Massive
and yet
difference.
he could put some muscle on. I'm not saying he can't do that, and he probably should. But when you think about his size, I really believe he's a natural welterweight. Welterweight also happens to be the hottest division in the sport right now.
True.
You just suffered 2 losses at 185 back-to-back when you main evented both of those fights, meaning the UFC kind of, and Houston's a very Spanish-heavy market, even though Sean Strickland is popular here. Fluffy got a huge pop here. Sacramento is obviously 45 minutes from his hometown. So the UFC has now built 2 cards off of you, and you've lost both of them. I think a fresh coat of paint is in order. And think about like Yaroslav Amosov. Think about Michael Morales, Sean Brady, Joaquin Buckley. I mean, the list goes on and on for who you could pair Fluffy with that's going to be a totally different matchup, size-wise a little bit more favorable for him. And I think if he does it intelligently, he needs 6 months anyways after the beating he took last night, go and properly take a little bit of fat off. Just drop your body fat percentage by 3 or 4%. We're not asking for anything crazy. And then do a mock weight cut with one of these guys that, you know, Nick Sick is plugged in with, or whoever it is that Fluffy uses, and see if your body can safely get to that 170 mark. And I think if the answer to that is yes, the direction of his career is so clear cut. He has to make that move. And like I said, it's the hottest division in the sport, and you don't have matchups with any of those guys. So anything is exciting. The world is his oyster down there.
Yeah, that's well said. And we see guys leave their division and go to a different division for many reasons in the UFC. Islam Makhachev went to 170 because he wanted to have the legacy and the respect amongst his peers as being the greatest fighter of all time. He knew he couldn't do that at 155. So he was going constantly winning and decided to leave a division. Fluffy Hernandez has main evented 2 fight nights in a row now. now, and his stock hasn't gone down at all. But a fresh coat of paint could actually be very interesting. And him at 170 just inserts another absolute killer and a reliable guy for the UFC. I don't hate the idea of him going to 170 at all. And I actually think he could make the weight for sure.
JDM versus Fluffy.
Yeah.
Tell me you don't want to see that.
Exactly. That's a great fight. And there's a whole bunch more. Like, I think it would be very interesting. And sometimes all we need is just some new faces and some new options for a fighter to get excited for them again. Like, do we want to see him just jump back into fighting top 15 185ers, or should we insert him into the most stacked division in the UFC right now, which is welterweight? And then, you know, he's got all these different options that he can compete against, who I don't think he would have a size disadvantage against, except for maybe Michael Morales. And then, you know, it's off to the races. When you have a guy come from a weight class above and drop down, everybody kind of gets on notice and they're like, okay, this is a different size guy. He had a lot of success at 185. Maybe he's going to be too big for us. Is he going to be a weight bully? You know, some people call it weight bullying when you cut a little bit extra weight. I don't think so. I think Fluffy actually is naturally built for 170. I think he would look good there. Again, I'm not pushing for him to go to 170. I wouldn't mind if he stayed at 185. Certainly don't go to 205. But I do agree that
definitely don't do that.
Yeah, Robocop, maybe you go to 205 because you're too damn big. But yeah, I think Fluffy going to 170 would be interesting. And like I said, his stock didn't drop at all after that fight. I mean, he brought the house down in a main event in his hometown, or 45 minutes from his hometown. So obviously, he's still a reliable source for the UFC, and they can bank on him and count on him to show up and perform to the best of his abilities. And win, lose, or draw, the crowd is going to feel like they got their money's worth when he's competing in the cage. 185 may be a little bit too much for him with the modern weight cuts and how guys are getting so big for their weight classes. So 170 might be the perfect home for Mr. Hernandez.
Yeah, well, and I agree that his stock didn't go down because he's a dog, right?
Yeah.
He fights like he's a fun fighter. But even though his style is kind of grappling heavy, he's still very exciting to watch. But he's not going to, you could easily plug him into a JDM or somebody like that, or a Bilal Muhammad. Like, he can get a former champion very easily at 170. Maybe you could do Izzy, right, at 185, but I don't think Izzy would be chomping at the bit for that fight. That's not a particularly favorable stylistic matchup. I don't know that, that really does much for Adesanya in wanting to fight him. So I think...
And it might not do much for Fluffy either.
Exactly. So I think his options are better at 70, but let's move into wrestling now. RAF. Henry Cejudo got his revenge on Merab, and it happened real quickly too. He pinned him, and I think it was 25 or 35 seconds into the match. It was all she wrote. Henry Cejudo said, "I lost in Georgia, but there's no way I'm coming back to the US of A, where I represented this country and won an Olympic gold medal, and losing another wrestling match to Merab." So credit to Triple C. He got it done in quick fashion last night.
Yeah, and Merab made sure to say, when it comes to fighting, I'm the king. But he's an Olympic gold medalist. He's the wrestling guy, so it's only right that, he does beat me eventually in something. And wrestling is where he has his best skills. It's where maybe I don't have as many accolades or accomplishments, but I would love to have another match with Henry. And honestly, I wouldn't mind watching Merab compete with Henry, whatever it is they want to do all the time. Those two guys just mix together really seamlessly, and they're both classy individuals. Merab, humble in victory, humble in defeat. Henry Cejudo, it looked to me like he was kind of back to his old ways. It sort of felt like he kind of tuned out of competition. And that mindset is something very real, right? Once you've kind of removed yourself from competing at the highest level, and then you try to get yourself back in there, it can be difficult. And that's why he got the result with the first Merab fight. He was way up on the scorecards, and then he ends up losing because Merab's pace and competitive nature just kicked in, and he was able to overwhelm Cejudo. And, Henry Cejudo also just announced that he's going to be boxing Dean the Great, who is Adrian Broner's protege, if you will, on a Misfits boxing match. So I find that the fact that we saw Henry Cejudo come out and show that competitive edge, that nature of an Olympic gold medalist and a 2-division world champion in the UFC come back out of Henry, that tells me something is very interesting for this boxing match. Now, I know Dean the Great is a streamer. He's an influencer, but he is taking the boxing training seriously. He's in the gym every day with a 4-time former world champion in Adrian Broner. So he's going to have the advantage as far as just, striking, just hands are concerned. Henry Cejudo, again, 2-division world champion in the UFC, Olympic gold medalist. He just got himself a belt at RAF, but his skills rely mostly on his grappling skills and what he's able to do with a full gamut of tools that he can use. So he's going to limit himself tremendously to box Dean the Great. But what I will say is, Dean the Great is not the competitor that Henry Cejudo is. And I was worried about Henry leading up to this boxing match, especially because of what we saw Merab do to him on the wrestling match. I'm like, okay, if Henry's now losing to
wrestling matches where he won an Olympic gold medal.
Exactly. Then I'm like, okay, well, then Dean the Great's going to clean him up. But I do think that if Henry Cejudo comes out and brings that competitive nature and makes this boxing match with Dean the Great ugly and nasty and aggressive and just puts an MMA style pace, it channeled your inner Merab the Machine Dvalishvili and go put the put it on Dean the Great, I do think that he actually bettered his chances. And I know this sounds weird, but his performance on the RAF mats last night showed me enough to make me think that he has much more of a chance in boxing against Dean the Great than if he wouldn't have had this rematch and success against Merab in the rematch.
Well, I mean, Dean the Great wanted to legitimize himself as a boxer, so he chooses an almost 40-year-old 5'3" wrestler who, won two titles in the UFC, as you just pointed out, which is phenomenal, and that's a great accolade for Dean.
Sure.
But when you look at it like height, reach, style of fighting, the way that Henry would win fights, even
age.
Exactly, age. Even when Henry would strike well, he would usually set it up with, kind of high kicks and big dynamic movement. And you're kind of taking all those tools away. So in my opinion, I still probably think Dean the Great will win the boxing match, and then he will actually be able to say, yeah, I beat a former UFC champion. That's the game that boxers have played for a long time.
Try that with Sugar Sean O'Malley, an actual striker in that same weight class.
Yeah, Sean knocks Dean the Great out in one round,
Yeah,
very, very easily. And but
bird to the eye, overhand, Dean the Great goes to sleep.
As Tim Welch said, the famous bird to the eyes. Unfortunately, you can't see the bird through a boxing glove. Maybe they could do that in 4-ounce gloves. But, let's get back to the RAF because there was a lot of stuff that happened last night. So Jordan Burroughs, phenomenal, probably the best wrestling talent maybe we've ever had out of the United States.
I'll raise you on that. I think Jordan Burroughs is one of the best competitors in sports history.
He is, and it's a bummer because he said in an interview leading up to this fight, I would have loved to have competed in MMA, but that ship has sailed for me. And he gave respect to the Russians, mainly the Dagestanis. He was in the Chechens. He said, look, I've wrestled a bunch of those guys and I've beaten a lot of them, but I don't want to get in a fight with any of those guys.
There you go.
And, I think Jordan Burroughs, when you look, I think we will watch Gable Stevenson's career in the UFC. Jordan Burroughs is equally or more, decorated as a wrestler. Yep. He is equally as athletic or more athletic. And we will say, damn, that probably would have been Burroughs had he gone that route. He didn't, and that's life, right? But I think that him saying that I love that he shined up the Russian wrestlers, and he's like, make no mistake, you guys call these guys boring fighters and decision merchants. These guys are the real deal.
Oh, yeah. And, he's very right to say that. Wrestling in MMA is totally different than wrestling for wrestling. Just like jiu-jitsu is, there's some beautiful techniques you can see at IBJJF, and you watch the Abu Dhabi tournament, and you watch Eddie Bravo's Invitational, everything. There's so many different styles, UFC, BJJ, and 90% of it does not work in MMA. There's too many different variables. The range is different. The takedown entries are different. You can't pull guard. So if your game is largely from the bottom, you can't really have that same success in MMA. And it's really cool that Jordan Burroughs sees the difference in wrestling for MMA versus wrestling for wrestling, because of all the disciplines, I would say wrestling has the least to adapt and change to fit into the MMA spectrum. And I really do appreciate when somebody comes out and is just brutally honest. I don't want to deal with those guys because, I may be able to tech fall them on the wrestling match, but when you bring a cage into the equation, when you bring strikes into the equation, when you bring submissions into the equation, now you're dealing with a totally different thing. I mean, let's not forget, just a couple of months ago, Dylan Dennis had Khamzat Chimaev dead to rights in a submission attempt. And look, that's because
Hamzat didn't sign up for a submission grappling affair, but
exactly.
he got put in a guillotine nonetheless.
You know, and a wrestler doesn't think, okay, I need to protect my neck in this situation. You say submissions are off the table, so I don't need to worry about somebody snatching a choke on me. But Dylan Dennis never plays by the rules. He's the bad guy for a reason. And, you know, I just really do appreciate and respect Jordan Burroughs for seeing the difference in the skill sets because MMA is a different game. And like he said, the Dagestanis are kind of the shining example of the best grapplers in MMA right now. And while Americans may have more success historically in wrestling, whether it's the Olympics or the national games or collegiate wrestling, whatever it is, they may have more success against some of those guys on the mats. It's different when you incorporate the cage. It's different when you incorporate the strikes. And the Abdulmanap Nurmagomedov system for taking people to the cage and then cooking them with your grappling, taking them to a position where you can either ground and pound and force them to make mistakes, or you can just flat out submit them with some sort of technique that maybe isn't seen as much in just pure grappling, right, or pure jiu-jitsu. We don't see as many just rear naked chokes, guillotines, darces, and kimuras in pure jiu-jitsu because there's so many different defenses. But when you're beating somebody up and you're exhausting them through strikes and now they're flailing and making mistakes, those sort of traditional submissions present themselves a lot more often in MMA. And that's why the percentage for rear naked chokes is way higher than the percentage for heel hooks, unless you're Walter Walker, of course. But
then you just rattle off 4 of them in a row and then do a calf slicer just for good measure.
Right.
You know?
If you go to ADCC and you just watch maybe the qualifying rounds, there's a ton of heel hooks. There's a ton of joint manipulation going on. When you go to the UFC, it's mostly blood chokes, yeah. and maybe every now and again, Islam Makhachev's very good. He can find that Kimura, but for the most part, you're just finding the meat and potatoes of submission grappling, and I think that Jordan Burroughs hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, and so Gable Steveson got a win last night. Tyron Woodley got a win last night. Just one quick thing, and then we'll move on to the boxing. Bo Nickal lost to Max McNelly. Now, a lot of people, and this is unfair criticism of Bo, Max is like 21 or 22 years old, under 20 world champion, NCAA champion.
And doesn't have a main job of being a UFC ranked fighter. He's just a wrestler.
He's not 5 years removed from his last wrestling competition like Bo is. And Bo had, gave him a pretty good match. So what were your thoughts on that just briefly?
I thought Chael Sonnen had a really great point about the Bo Nickal match. He said that Bo Nickal is basically trying to win this fight with defense. And when you're the older guy, I guess this makes total sense, right? Whether it's striking or wrestling, we're going to use wrestling as the example. When you're the older guy and you're going with the younger guy, whether it's on the mats, in the practice room, or you're actually competing against them, you almost just let them come to you and then they make a mistake and then you work off that mistake. Bo was sort of waiting for that opportunity, and they both scored a point with the shot clock. Neither of them were able to successfully shoot and get a takedown on the shot clock, so they both got a point given to them. But McNeely was able to get out there and get the points needed through a wrestling technique on Bo Nickal, which is very difficult to do. I understand that he's 5 years removed from competing as a pure wrestler, but he's still on the wrestling mats at Penn State pretty much all the time. He's training with the best wrestlers in the world to get himself ready for MMA fights. So this Max McNeely guy is very, very impressive. And to get a win like that under your belt and on your resume, very impressive. But I do think that if Bo would have brought that tenacity that we saw at the very end of the match all the way through from the opening bell, he may have given himself more opportunities to win the match. But I just see it as Chael said it. When the older guy is in there, he's sort of waiting and using crafty experience that veterans possess to make a mistake when you get a little bit brazen or gung-ho and want to go for something, and then he's going to force you into an error because his positioning's good, his footwork's usually good. But this Max kid is very serious, and if he's able to beat Bo Nickal, I think the sky is the limit for what he can do on the RAF mats. Who knows if he comes to the UFC? Who knows if he comes to MMA at all? But I wouldn't mind seeing it.
Well, 21 years old that beat Bo Nickal, you got to think like he's got that at least in the back of his mind. But I'm going to be interested to see if RAF, because RAF, from what I understand, pays pretty well.
Yeah.
If that deters your Jordan Burroughs of the future. Because, when Jordan was coming up, now he made a lot of money off of endorsements. Sure. And I don't think that he's not financially set. He probably is. But, for these other guys, they kind of would always go the MMA route because that was where the money is. But with RAF paying good and these guys able to compete, like even if they're not making a per match deal that they would make for a UFC fight, the RAF's putting on a fight or two every month, and you're talking about 6 minutes worth of wrestling. These guys are used to tournaments where they'll wrestle 4 or 5 or 6 times in a day, right? And so
the UFC pays more to Arman Sarukian to fight in a cage than RAF pays him, but he can show up every weekend
and do 6 minutes of work.
Exactly. Yeah. So I find that actually very interesting. And, one thing we love about wrestling and basically anything other than MMA is you don't take quite as much damage. So you can be in the headlines and you can be on events much more frequently. An MMA fighter's lucky if they can get 3 matches in a year, and that's considered a pretty active schedule, especially once you're in the UFC. So these RAF matches are just going to keep churning over, and they're going to keep putting out content. I think that they're going to grow really fast, and they're going to give wrestlers that don't want to get punched in the face an opportunity and a lane to grow their brand and get paid, make a living doing what they loved and what they grew up doing. Most wrestlers that came over to MMA never had any plans on getting punched in the face. That's why they were wrestling their whole life. They would have gone to a boxing gym if they wanted to get punched in the face, but they decided to do that, and then they sort of graduate from wrestling. There's nowhere else to go but the Olympics or Division I college, and then after that, you basically just go and become a coach
or WWE
or WWE, or you go, okay, you know what? I'm going to bite the bullet. I've got a really good set of skills as far as taking the fight where I want to go. I can dictate where this fight takes place, and even though this guy might be a better striker than me, if I can put him on his back, his striking is basically non-existent. So wrestlers were like, I'll take that deal. I'll go wrestle over in the UFC, and we've seen a ton of success out of wrestlers coming over to the UFC. Maybe the best base for MMA is pure wrestling, but giving them an opportunity to grow in the sport that they grew up doing is really cool. I love that RAF's doing that. And whether we see Max over in the UFC ever, or he's able to just stack the bread over at RAF, I'll be happy with either. But I definitely love that guys like Bo Nickal, who respect the sport of wrestling and also do MMA, are willing to utilize their name and their star power and their recognition to raise up these wrestlers who most people, even combat sports fans, don't know about.
Yeah, and very well said. And let's finish up today's conversation with some boxing.
Okay.
So Teofimo Lopez became a 3-division world champion last night, defeating Rolly Romero. Rolly had a lot to say after the fight. A lot of it was not true, in my opinion.
When I saw the headline on the YouTube video for the post-fight press conference and it said, "A defiant Rolly Romero," I was like, okay, well, I have to click on that. I don't even know what he's going to be saying, but the chip on his shoulder was apparent. He wasn't listening to his corner. He wasn't even looking them in the eye. And, the commentary team had picked up on that, and you could tell that his coach he knows his fighter, and he knew that he couldn't get through to Rolly at all. And it seemed like he was just blank face, deadpan as long as the fight was going, and particularly in between the rounds. And his coach said something that, coaches pay attention to every detail of your life. Rolly said, "I want to be considered a Hall of Fame boxer." And his coach said after about round 4 or 5, something like that, he goes, "This is not how Hall of Famers fight. If you want to be in the Hall of Fame, you got to do a whole lot more than what you're doing." And, Rolly just sort of brushed it off and didn't really take it with any sort of respect. And I hate seeing disrespect in your own corner. If you want to disrespect your opponent, if you want to cause a little bit of heat to get some traction on your fight, I'm all for that. But your corner is there to protect you. They've been with you every step of the way from the fight camp, depending on how long you've been with them. Sometimes your entire life is spent with this team. And to show the disrespect to your corner is not cool. But then he came out, and you could just see that a lot of stuff is bothering Rolly Romero. He was like, almost shocked that the judges scored it the way they did, which I don't know if he's blind or what. When he goes back and watches this fight, he's got to be frustrated with himself, because he was sitting there going, Teofimo Lopez didn't land a single strike on me, which is completely false. Even one of the guys asking questions after the fight was like, well, he landed a lot on the body, and your head was kind of so far back. You were in this Philly shell. He couldn't really reach you, but he was still putting points on the board and hitting you with volume, maybe hitting your guard a little bit, but then of course going to the body. And he goes, your body's even red. And he goes, no, it's not. He made a point to lift his shirt up and show, and he didn't see it. But if you did look a little bit higher by the ribs, there were red marks all over it. I'm colorblind, and I can see red on Rolly Romero's body. And obviously he was just in a bad mood, had a bad attitude, and thinks that he won that fight, which is next level delusion, in my opinion. I never want to trash a guy, but when you come out with that sort of performance, lackluster to say the least, all he did was land about 3 really nice check hooks. Now, one of them cut Teofimo up pretty good, and it did leak blood all over the canvas. It leaked blood all over Rolly, but you cannot win a fight with 3 check hooks in 3 different rounds and expect to get your hand raised. Like, Teofimo didn't get dropped by any of those. Yeah, he looked like he got wobbled by a couple of them, but even if I give you 10-8 rounds, or I won't even say 10-8s because they weren't drops. Even if you won all 3 of those rounds that you got one good shot on Teofimo in, that still is 9 rounds for Teofimo and 3 rounds for you. I just don't see how Rolly sees anywhere in his mind how he won that fight. Teofimo tried his best to catch up with him, but Rolly was on his bike the entire fight, and Teofimo was trying his best to engage in boxing, but Rolly was just not having any of it. He was obviously defensively sound. We know that he's got crazy power in his left hook, and he knows how to find that check hook. As soon as you extend with a 2, he's able to beat you to the punch, and he always finds that inside lane for his check hook. That's exactly what he did, but he only did it 3 times. If he would have followed that up with some flurries, if he would have attacked a little bit more, if he would have just made a statement in a couple of rounds, he could have won that fight. But instead, he was just relying on the fact that I landed the cool punches. It almost reminded me of Nate Diaz versus Leon Edwards. For the boxing fans, that's a UFC fight that took place. Leon Edwards whooped Nate Diaz's ass for the entire fight, except for in the last 30 seconds, Nate Diaz landed a big shot. It wobbled Leon, and instead of following up with a big flurry of punches,
he did nothing with it.
He just flicked him off and got the crowd to go insane. And Nate's like, yeah, I had the biggest shot of the night. Clearly I won. And it's like, no, Nate, that's not how the game is scored.
That's actually not how it's scored.
10-9 must system, round after round. You need to log some points early in this fight, or you got to go for a finish. Nate Diaz didn't get a finish. Rolly Romero didn't get a finish. And that's the issue. That's why he lost the fight. And I didn't even think it was all that competitive.
No, it wasn't close. And the thing that Rolly, I think when he watches this fight back, if he's honest with himself, if there is a part of him when the cameras are not in his face and when he's not pulling all the BS that he's pulling, where he's just home by himself watching the fight back, he will look at it and say, I lost this fight because of a lack of output. Because when he threw, as you said, the check hook, he landed some nice clean shots on Teofimo. He hurt Teofimo at times. He cut Teofimo, and then he did nothing with it. And you can't win a fight off of 3 check hooks. You pointed that out very eloquently. So, and to say that he wasn't actually hit with anything clean by Teofimo is absurd. Now, did Teofimo have the best performance of his life? No, but did he land shots on Rolly Romero way more than Rolly landed on him? 100%.
Controlled the ring 100% of the fight.
Yeah.
He landed more shots. He threw more volume. I mean, it was just a clean sweep for Teofimo. I would, even if I do, which I'm not giving him... I'm not giving Rolly the 3 rounds that he landed the check hooks in, but even if I did, he still is significantly down on the scorecards. And I just don't, I'm trying to get into the mind of Rolly Romero, right? And obviously with Floyd Mayweather having a very defensive style, once he became Floyd Money Mayweather and was no longer Pretty Boy Floyd, he went from a very offensive attacking style fighter to a defensive minded guy. And sure, he made it to 50-0 as a pro, and credit to him for doing that. But depending on who's judging the fights and how the fights are scored, if you're not doing enough offense, your defense alone will never win you a world title fight.
No, and I guess there's some subset of the boxing community that believes it will, because I've had people argue with me tooth and nail that Conor McGregor didn't win a single round against Floyd Mayweather, and I point to the first round where Floyd didn't land a single punch. And there are, believe it or not, as hard as it is to believe, people in the boxing community that do believe that you can win a round of boxing without landing a single punch, which is the most absurd thing ever.
And he actually didn't even throw a punch in the first round. So Floyd Mayweather goes out there. I think maybe he did attempt 1 punch or 1 jab in the first round, but Conor McGregor landed plenty of shots. And I know it pains boxing fans to listen to this, but Conor McGregor deserves at least 1 round logged in against the best boxer of all time when he's being more active, when he's trying to control the ring. There is a criteria for scoring fights. Damage is always number 1. Ring control falls in there somewhere behind that. And, you can just sort of tell, your eyes never lie to you. The crowd also never lies to you. When you see the crowd go insane for big strikes landed, you understand, okay, that guy's having the better moments in this round, and you can always concede. Look, Floyd Mayweather got his hand raised. He stopped Conor McGregor, but we can't just live in this fairy tale world of Conor McGregor didn't win a single round, even though Floyd Mayweather didn't throw a single punch in one of those rounds.
Or my favorite one is that Floyd just carried him for fun, which is equally as ridiculous. But Anyways, Rolly Romero will regret not having more output. Congratulations to Teofimo Lopez. He looked good.
And he did say he wants a rematch, but I can't imagine that DAZN is going to want to do anything with those two again as far as putting them together. Teofimo tried his best to make a fight happen. The fight was not there for him because Rolly was just simply running away the entire fight. And his defense is really sharp. He knows how to stay away, get on his bike, circle, move constantly, and give you one shot to worry about and maybe cause hesitance out of a guy like Teofimo. But Teofimo gets an A for effort. He was at least trying to have a boxing match. Rolly Romero was not. He was just looking to land single shots every now and again. And if I'm DAZN and if I'm the guys who are in charge of making the next match for those two, I'm keeping them as far away from one another as possible. I'm giving Rolly Romero a rough treatment, trying to find somebody who's going to just force a dogfight out of him and give Teofimo Lopez a different opportunity to now defend this third world title.
Yeah, well said. And I mean, one thing I always do after I watch the fight on fight night is go back the next day and watch the highlights right before we sit down and record.
Yeah.
And so I found it on DAZN's YouTube page. I think it was like 2 minutes and 6 seconds worth of highlights out of a 12 round 3-minute round fight. So 36 minutes deduced down to about 2 minutes of action was all that DAZN thought was worthy of the highlight reel. So that tells you the full story there.
And also the comment, somebody commented in the comment section. They said the comment section of this fight is more entertaining than the fight itself, which that tells you it was not a very successful night as far as being a spectator and enjoying a night of boxing.
Well, and Rolly expended more energy in the post-fight press conference with his antics than he actually did in the ring.
And can I also just say, Brand Risk had an event, and so you have legitimate boxing happening with Teofimo Lopez on the top of the bill, and then you've got Brand Risk with Super Hot Fire and Larry Wheels and Vitaly being, I think that might have been the main event, or Austin McBroom. I'm not sure who the main event was, but Larry Wheels
doesn't really matter.
Was in there. It doesn't matter. And, obviously Larry has been getting submitted and choked out and embarrassed on MMA mats constantly. He just can't seem to get a win on any sort of practice mat out there, wherever it is that he's streaming. And, even the frustration of slamming his car door and being upset. He's an entertainer, so I know that maybe some of that is a little fabricated. But a guy who is as big as he is and thinks that he's as tough as he is frustrated when a 125 amateur guy is submitting him in about 10 seconds. But, he finally gets in there, and he's not boxing a real boxer. He's not doing MMA against a real MMA fighter. He's boxing a troll and another influencer in Vitaly, who I don't think he took this seriously at all. I can't imagine Vitaly even did one round of sparring leading up to this fight. But Larry Wheels, that muscle-bound body type and that frame being all tense the way he was fighting, is not good for your muscles. You're going to gas out really fast. And unfortunately, Larry didn't have time to gas out because, boom, he blew his bicep out, tore the bicep completely. I mean, it looked like it was sagging. He's kind of got that bodybuilder chest where, the bottom tends to sag a little bit. I think they call it gynecomastia. But his biceps looked like they had a little bit of bicep clemastia because that bicep just fell right off the bone. And, it's a no contest. So anybody who had a little skin in the game on there was probably frustrated because Larry was probably supposed to win that fight pretty easily. Somehow Vitaly doesn't get a loss on his record. Maybe they'll fight again. I would like to see a rematch, but I don't know how long the recovery is going to be for Larry Wheels to get that bicep fixed. Maybe that's a sign that if you're going to do combat sports, you got to pull off a little bit of that muscle and maybe don't be so tense next time you get in a Misfits or a Brand Risk boxing ring.
What happened to Larry Wheels last night against Vitaly is what you call instant karma.
Yeah.
In boxing, you don't punch an opponent when you knock him down. Larry Wheels got himself a pretty decent knockdown. Yeah. He was overwhelming Vitaly. That was the direction the fight was going to go. He was probably going to get a TKO there in the first round.
Sure.
And what does he do? He throws an uppercut with a downed opponent and immediately tears his bicep. It's so poetic that it's like that's what we want to see when somebody does a cheap shot. Imagine now, because we're UFC guys, right? Yeah. So imagine if every time Cyril Gane hits somebody in the back of the head, his tricep just tore. Right. It's like that instant karma that you want when you poke somebody in the eye, your own eye gets poked. But it's like, I'm being silly here, but like you almost never see instant karma inside of an octagon or inside of a boxing ring. But Larry Wheels suffered a hefty dose of instant karma last night that's going to cause him to have surgery and likely be out for a little while.
Yeah, I almost wish karma exclusively worked like that. It only comes back instantly. You don't have to worry about 6 months from now. Oh shoot, I had some sort of incident happen, and that's karma from what I did. Instant karma is always the most fulfilling and enjoyable to watch. But he did make a mistake, and one thing that we see all the time in this influencer boxing space is illegal moves take place, and majority of the time it's a guy getting dropped by a shot, but he's still got his wits about him, right? These boxers that are influencers, or these guys like Larry Wheels who are bodybuilders, they think they can punch really hard, but they can't, and so they finally get somebody down, and then they have to throw a cheap shot. So maybe a point should have been taken, but that would all be a moot point because Larry Wheels ended that fight. He could not continue. I also love that Rampage Jackson was asked by Aiden Ross. He's like, would he have been given the option to continue if he wanted to? And Rampage was like, yeah.
Welcome to MMA, buddy. MMA, this is the tough guy business.
Just look at Magomed Magomedov, who fought on PFL. We had a lot of stuff to cover this weekend, tons of fights. He had his shoulder come out of socket, and none other than the champion of 170 in the UFC, the pound-for-pound best fighter in the world, Islam Makhachev, pops that shoulder right back into place, only for it to go out again. And of course, Islam had to be the best man in the arena and be the wise adult and throw in the white towel. Unfortunate for Magomed Magomedov, but let's not make a mistake. Even though Magomedov didn't win and he had to lose in a tough sort of fashion where you get the towel thrown in, he is the guy that has a win over Peter Yan long before Peter Yan was the champion of the UFC, long before Peter Yan was even in the UFC. So I don't know what's going to happen for them next, but hopefully his shoulder heals up. Hopefully Larry Wheels' bicep heals up, and we can see both of them in action again soon.
There we go. Guys, thanks so much for watching this video. We hope you enjoyed it. If you have not already, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that bell notification button so you don't miss any Barnhill Brothers drops. And big shout out and thank you to all of our channel members. Our premium members are growing by the day, it seems, and Nick and I are working on some really fun stuff for you guys. So if you're considering becoming a channel member, take a look at what we offer and definitely make that jump if you can. We will appreciate it, and we promise to deliver way more value than the cost per month. So thank you all so much again. We will see you in the next one.
Peace.